Hello, everybody. Jeremy Senpai here, and I am giving you my second podcast entry in 2024's Valentine's Day. And this one is actually one that holds a very specific meaning to me. We will be talking about the Disney short Johnny Fedora and Alice Bluebonnet. Alright, first of all, this is a short film that was released in 1946, and the story is actually pretty straightforward. I will explain it briefly, but first I just want to explain why this does hold some significance for me. I remember when I first saw this short on a Disney VHS that I'm sure I still have somewhere, and I do feel like not enough people talk about how meaningful this short story is. There is definitely a lot to talk about, and I would go so far as say that this would probably even warrant a full Disney film if it was ever given the chance. This is probably one of the most underrated Disney love stories. Alright, without further ado, I'm just going to get right into it. The story follows Johnny Fedora and his wife Alice Bluebonnet. Both of them are featured right in front of a department store where we do see them thinking about their future together. They are already together by this point until tragedy strikes, or close enough to tragedy when it comes to this sort of thing. Alice is bought and leaving Johnny all alone until sometime later, probably within the next few days, Johnny is bought himself. Then we see Johnny's owner taking him out, and through the crowd of people all wearing headgear, hats or bonnets or anything else, he manages to see Alice. Alice and her owner are getting onto a rail car, and Johnny abandons his owner to chase after Alice. However, this eventually proves fruitless, as he is almost run over by a bicycle, a streetcar. He is attacked by two dogs, until finally he is discovered by a vagrant who picks up Johnny alongside a cigarette that just happened to be laying there. Judging by the man's apparel, and by the way he's dressed, he's probably someone down on his luck, some sort of vagrant of some kind. And then we see the vagrant, while wearing Johnny, going into a speakeasy, sitting at a bar. And once in there, he is sitting at a bar. We see Johnny reflecting in the mirror behind the bar, and while his owner is very interested in a pretty pink hat, he's not interested in the pink hat. He's obviously interested in the woman wearing the pink hat. However, this apparently gets the attention of someone else, maybe of another man. Maybe he's her boyfriend or her husband, but overall, this results in an entire bar brawl after Johnny's owner pulls a gun and starts firing. After this, the police are called, and all the police are basically just police helmets. Johnny is able to avoid getting detected by any way, mainly because he hid, but we can infer that because almost everyone was arrested and this was a speakeasy. I'll get into my own thing about that later, that his owner, especially since he did fire a gun down there, he has been arrested. Johnny Fedora is eventually on his own. By this point, winter has come about. He literally almost freezes his brim off. He returns to the department store where he and Alice originated from, only to see a husband's top hat as well as a wedding veil, most likely taking their place. And Johnny Fedora does feel pretty horrible by this, because it reminds him of what he could have had. Full of despair, he is literally swept into the sidewalk with garbage. He's flat as a pancake, literally crushed under a horse-drawn cart. And finally, he is caught in a stream of water from a street sweeper. He almost ends up in the sewer if he's not saved by a man. This man apparently drives a cart where is drawn by two horses. The man drives an ice cart, He cuts holes in inside Johnny's sides to make room for the ears for his horse. However, when Johnny looks to his side, he sees that the horse's mate is also wearing Alice Blue Bonnet. So after all this time, Johnny and Alice are reunited. It may not be the life that they were imagining, but they are reunited. They are sitting very happily on these two horses, who we can assume are mates as well. And even though Johnny and Alice's story is a bit sad in the beginning, it does have a very happy ending. I would go so far to say that this is probably an underrated Disney love story. I'm sure that there are plenty of people who would love to see a full-length movie of this. But now I'm going to go into a few things that people actually have come to miss regarding the story of Johnny, Fedora, and Alice Blue Bonnet. First of all is actually the time period all this takes place. We do know that this short film debuted in 1946. However, I'm willing to bet that this actually takes place in the 1920s. Well, there are a number of reasons for this. Let's see. For starters, this was the year of Prohibition, which was from 1920 to 1933. For those of you unaware, this was a time where drinking and owning alcohol was considered forbidden in some places. So people would come together in underground stores and shops known as speakeasies. There's definitely a lot to prove about this, because when Johnny's owner goes downstairs, there are a bunch of pretty women on the stage who are probably there to entertain the guests, just like in a speakeasy would. He's literally sitting at a bar, and because when the police are involved, everybody is arrested regardless if they were involved in the fight or not. I know that a lot of people may debate me on this, but that is what it looks like. But we can also get a pretty good timetable of when this took place. Okay, the Great Depression didn't take place until 1929, and let's see. And because almost everybody is shown to wear very stylish hats and bonnets, almost everyone is wearing suits, and everyone seems relatively happy and so on. So we can assume that this is definitely before 29, probably between 1920 to 28. But also, even the cost of Alice Blue Bonnet is actually a hint of this. It says so in the song itself that Alice sold for $23.94. But also, if we add the rate of what that would cost today, then Alice would cost about $368 today back in 1920s. And yes, that is definitely a lot. And I will get to that in just a moment, because obviously the woman who bought Alice Blue Bonnet was very well off. We can infer that from the way she was dressed, from the way that she just bought Alice for $23.94, or the case right now, that would be, or what that would be considered back then, $368 back then, that she is very well off. Either she comes from a wealthy family, her parents are rich, the man she's married to is rich, or that sort of thing. So I actually do have another thing I want to add here. There is a huge, if we look over, we can infer that this does take place in New York City, or even just New York State, because it also says so in the song that Johnny looked everywhere for Alice. He looked from Brooklyn to the Jersey Shore. So, and there's also this big gathering where Johnny leaves his owner. It looks like a building is probably being built up, some sort of. Basically, we see giant industrial machines laying down the foundation and the groundwork, indicating that this is the site for a very large building in the future. Now, obviously, that would be the case by 1946, but they don't know it at the time. I'm not really sure exactly when the break ground would be. If anyone has any theories on that, feel free to tell me. Alright, moving on. Now we cut back to what I mentioned before. How exactly did Alice end up on the horse? I mean, we obviously followed Johnny's story of how he ended up on the horse, so I would like to infer something. How did Alice Blue Bonnet end up on a horse's head? Well, just like with Johnny, when she caught a glimpse of him in that crowded area, she probably tried her best to separate from her own owner and go find Johnny herself. Yes, it's actually a very good theory that I'm willing to back up here. Okay, for starters, back to what I said before about how Alice cost $23.94 or $368.10 back then. You would only spend that kind of money if you intended to keep what you bought, especially with everything going on, even though the Depression hadn't started yet. Basically, you wouldn't spend that kind of money unless you were intending to keep it. More likely, Alice's owner would either keep the bonnet for herself, or maybe even pass it on to her own child. So, I can only infer that Alice separated from her own owner until met with her own share of misfortune, and probably ended up eventually saved and placed on the female horse. That's just my thing right there. Okay, I've gone over the schematics, my theories, among other things. Now I just want to take a moment to praise how ambitious this short was, especially for the time. One thing that a lot of people really took away and still regard it to this day is how the hats and headwear actually resemble the people that they're on. For example, this could actually be the front runner for a lot of Disney shorts today. One of them that comes to mind is the Blue Umbrella, who is trying to meet the Blue Umbrella short that came out in 2013, which follows a very similar premise of a blue umbrella trying to meet up with his red umbrella love interest. That's just one of the best examples I could think of. And there really are signs of Johnny Fedora and Alice Blue Bonnet sprinkled throughout. Okay, now moving on from there, I just would like to add that basically the headwear of the characters, whether it's a hat or a bonnet, really does reflect the person, because that was the theme of the 1920s to 40s, 50s, and so on. That the kind of headwear that you wore, like a hat or a bonnet, reflected who you were as a person. So we have Johnny Fedora, who was obviously worn by different men, bonnets and other hats who were worn by women, even the blue police helmets that, of course, resemble the police. One might even take this story and kind of see it as Johnny's cycle of depression. Let's ignore the fact that he's a hat and he's being worn by different people. This could easily be seen as an allegory of Johnny being separated from his love and him going into a downward spiral. Him basically giving up on life, becoming a vagrant himself. He ends up in the speakeasy to try and drown his sorrows, to forget, until eventually everything else that happens. He literally keeps spiraling and hitting rock bottom until he's eventually reunited with Alice, who we can infer who we can interpret had her own little spiral down journey to try and find him. Anyway, that's all my thoughts. I would just like to point out that Johnny Fedora and Alice Blue Bonnet does remain a very relevant story. In fact, they even made a cameo in Disney's Once Upon a Studio short that came out in 2023. You really have to look to find them, but apparently you can see them being worn by two different Disney couples. The first being Tarzan and Jane Porter from Tarzan, and the other is that they're being worn by Nani and David from Lilo and Stitch. Like I keep saying, Once Upon a Studio is basically a family picture, and Alice and Johnny are part of that family. That to me is just really cool that even after all this time, these two characters who are thought to be forgotten still have some reverence even today. Anyway, guys, those are my thoughts. If you're looking for the short, then you can probably find it on YouTube. I'm not sure if it's on Disney Plus or not, but there are a million ways. Alright, everybody, that's my Valentine's podcast for now. I'll be talking about Ed and Eddie and Gravity Falls next. Not sure which one will come first. But anyway, this is Jeremy Senpai, sign off. Feel free to hit like, subscribe, and all that good stuff. Until next time.